So, you know, at the point that our political economy is nearly completely transformed to one dominated by manufacturing, heavy manufacturing economy, we call this period the Industrial Revolution, the late 1800s into the early part of the 1900s. Um, the economy is encouraging a different kind of motivation, a pursuit for wealth, um, in some ways a more conflictual relationship. There's struggles over whether employers are abusing employees. Um, we have the rise of organized labor to respond to that. So how do the little r Republicans, those who are interested in civic virtue, civic duty motivations for participation, how do they respond to this? Well, they basically argue that if people can negotiate for their wage, maybe then they have some independence. They have some independence, but not the kind of independence that they would have if they lived an agrarian life, right? And so, labor unions emerge out of this, right? The ability for people to collectively negotiate for their wages. But on the horizon is another shift in our political economy that's going to make it even more difficult for the institution of the political economy to encourage a more civic duty oriented kind of civic participation. And that is the emergence of a consumer oriented economy. And a lot of people, the idea of a consumer oriented economy goes back a long time, but you can point to essentially Henry Ford and the development of the modern conveyor belt, the development of the idea of a manufacturing plant where things could be built in mass quantities as the start of the modern, as the start of America's modern consumer-oriented economy. Henry Ford knew what he was doing. He knew that if he could build things that people wanted, even if they didn't know they wanted them, that they would find a way to buy them. And the car was something that he knew that if he could build it in mass quantities and make it affordable, that people would find that they wanted the car. And when Henry Ford perfected the manufacturing plant, the assembly line, suddenly a lot of stuff was being built on an assembly line, and suddenly consumer goods were more available to people than ever before. And people began to realize they wanted things. You used to go to the goods store and buy the necessities, right? You would buy your groceries at a butcher, you'd buy your fresh fruits at a vegetable seller, you would go to the dry goods store, you'd buy your dry goods. You didn't have a lot. I mean, you had, the clothes, maybe a set or two of clothes, but you didn't have a lot. And then suddenly, in the early part of the last century, and then moving forward to today, things became available. The big department stores that we all think about today, Macy's, right, Bloomingdale's, a lot of the big department stores around the country came into existence in the 1910s, 1920s because a lot of consumer goods became available. Now, the consumer-oriented economy encourages you to think about yourself. What do you want? Can you get what you want? And it's still conflicted though with some early ideals about civic duty, right? So as the Great Depression begins, President Roosevelt makes a speech that really conveys the conflict, right? So Roosevelt gives a speech, and it's called a call to service speech. And in this speech, he says, "There's one front and one battle where everyone in the United States, every man, woman, child, is in action, and will be privileged to remain in action throughout the war. That front is here at home and in our daily lives, in our daily tasks. Here at home, everyone will have the privilege of making whatever self-denial is necessary. This will require, of course, the abandonment not only of luxuries, but of many other creature comforts." So just as the Depression is happening, World War II is kicking off, Roosevelt calls people to service, and his call is, give up on things you don't need, right? So even then, Roosevelt recognizes that people have been in the habit of buying a lot, and they're really self-interested in this a lot, right? Buying a lot and getting a lot. And he's calling them to give up. So there's a sense of citizenship. Good citizenship is giving up and sacrificing for the larger whole. Contrast that with a speech that President Bush gave just after 9/11, when the terrorist attacks of 9/11. President Bush, this is a few weeks after 9/11. He's traveling around the country, and he stops at an airport in Chicago, O'Hare Airport, and he gives a speech, and he essentially says that we should not let the terrorists get their way, which is to stop our economy. And he says that people should go shopping, traveling, and living life, quote, the way we want it to be. The prescription that George W. Bush had for how to respond to the greatest disaster since Pearl Harbor was, in fact, to go shopping. So think about that difference in, Roosevelt's speech just at the beginning of World War II, George Bush's speech just after 9/11. One says sacrifice for the greater good. The other says go shop for the greater good. We'll come back to that thought.